The grand chamber of Congress was packed to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled with lawmakers, journalists, and political staffers, their eyes fixed on the two figures who would soon engage in a battle of wits and narratives. At the center of it all sat Adam Schiff, the seasoned politician, exuding his usual air of self-assured confidence. He had played this game before, manipulating hearings, controlling testimonies, and shaping public perception. Today, he believed, would be no different, but across from him stood Pam Bondi, the newly appointed U.S. Attorney General, a woman with a razor-sharp legal mind and an unshakable determination. She wasn't here to play politics. She was here to expose the truth. As the cameras rolled and the lights blazed overhead, Schiff leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. He had spent years perfecting the art of controlling narratives, and he was confident that today would be just another performance where he dictated the terms of the discussion. But something was different this time. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken realization that this wasn't going to be another carefully orchestrated hearing. Bondi, poised at the podium, adjusted her notes and looked directly at Schiff. The room hushed. She saw the subtle twitch in Schiff's jaw, the way his fingers tightened around his pen. He was prepared for a debate, but he wasn't prepared for her. She took a slow step forward, her voice calm yet commanding. "Honorable senators," she began, her words slicing through the silence like a scalpel, "we are not here for theatrics. We are here for the truth." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Schiff's confidence flickered for just a moment. The tone had shifted. This wasn't going to be a political spectacle designed for media soundbites. Bondi was about to do what no one else had dared: tear apart the foundation of Schiff's carefully constructed narrative, brick by brick. The battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a reckoning. Pam Bondi didn't waste a second. She wasn't here to engage in political theater. She was here to expose the carefully crafted deception that Adam Schiff and his allies had woven into the national consciousness. With an air of controlled precision, she flipped through her notes, her voice steady and unrelenting. "For weeks," she began, locking eyes with Schiff, "the American people have been told that this impeachment process was about truth and justice, that the White House was obstructing evidence, that President Trump had something to hide. But let's talk about what they did." A murmur swept through the chamber. Schiff, who had walked into the hearing with his usual smug confidence, suddenly stiffened in his chair. His fingers, once tapping rhythmically against the desk in an air of nonchalance, froze. He could feel the shift in the room. He could feel the weight of Bondi's words pressing against him. Bondi took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. They started these proceedings in a secret bunker, behind closed doors, barring the president and his legal team from defending themselves. They refused to allow Devin Nunes, the ranking member, the right to call witnesses. They denied Doug Collins the same, and yet they call this fairness. They call this justice. The tension in the chamber was suffocating. Schiff's jaw clenched slightly, but he said nothing. He had played the game of political maneuvering for years, carefully constructing his narratives, ensuring that his words were the ones that shaped public opinion. But now, under Bondi's scrutiny, that narrative was unraveling. She continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The House managers, led by Mr. Schiff, have spent weeks telling the American people that this administration is hiding something. But what they won't tell you is that they were the ones who controlled the evidence. They were the ones who cherry-picked the testimonies. They were the ones who ensured that only their version of events was ever heard." A few senators exchanged glances. They knew where this was going. The secret hearings, the selective leaks, the orchestrated spectacle. Bondi let that moment settle, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in before she struck again. "You see, senators, this isn't about transparency. This was never about uncovering the truth. This was about manufacturing a narrative, a carefully constructed, highly coordinated effort to manipulate the American public into believing that President Trump had committed an impeachable offense. But the facts tell a different story. She turned back toward Schiff, watching him closely now. The subtle movements, the way he shifted in his chair, the slight tightening of his lips, told her everything she needed to know. He had expected another predictable exchange, another partisan skirmish where he could brush off questions with polished deflections and empty sound bites. But this was different. Bondi wasn't just questioning his arguments, she was dismantling them piece by piece. And she wasn't done yet. Reaching for a document, she lifted it for all to see. "Here's what they won't tell you," she said, her voice gaining an edge. "The House took no action on the subpoenas issued to Mr. Duffy and Mr. Blair because they didn't want a court to rule against them. They didn't want a judge to confirm what we already know, that this entire process has been a sham from the start." The word sham hung in the air like a live wire. Schiff's fingers tightened around his pen. The once animated lawmakers who had entered the chamber expecting a routine defense of impeachment were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The room was no longer under Schiff's control. Bondi took another step forward, delivering the final blow. "Mr. Schiff," she said, her voice cool, deliberate, "you claim to be a champion of fairness, a defender of democracy. But tell me, where was your commitment to fairness when you blocked exculpatory witnesses? Where was your integrity when you leaked selective information to the press, knowing full well it would paint a distorted picture? Where was your sense of justice when you presided over a one-sided inquisition rather than an impartial fact-finding process?" She let the questions hang, the weight of them pressing down on every person in the room. Schiff swallowed hard. His usual ability to brush off accusations with a smirk and a well-rehearsed retort was failing him. Because Bondi wasn't throwing out baseless political rhetoric, she was laying out a case, methodically, surgically, the way a seasoned prosecutor dismantles a witness on the stand. And the entire chamber could feel it. Silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then finally, Schiff inhaled sharply, forcing himself to maintain composure. But he didn't answer. He couldn't answer, and in that moment, the realization settled over the room like a thundercloud. Schiff had walked into this hearing thinking he would be the one controlling the conversation. Instead, he had become the one on trial. Pam Bondi straightened her posture, her expression unreadable. She had only just begun, but already the tide had turned. The American people were watching, and for the first time they were seeing the truth without Schiff's filter. Pam Bondi didn't hesitate. She had Schiff cornered, but this wasn't just about him. This was about something bigger, an orchestrated cover-up that protected the powerful while condemning the innocent. And now, she was going to expose it all. She took a slow breath, then turned to the senators. "For weeks," she began, her voice clear and deliberate, "the House managers have insisted that this impeachment is about upholding justice, that President Trump must be removed for daring to question corruption in Ukraine." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she leaned forward slightly and delivered the hammer blow. "But if asking about corruption is an impeachable offense, then tell me, why wasn't Joe Biden questioned?" A murmur spread through the chamber. Schiff stiffened slightly but said nothing. Bondi could see his grip tighten around his pen. He knew what was coming. She continued, voice sharper now. "President Trump was accused of a quid pro quo, that he withheld aid to Ukraine in exchange for an investigation. But let's talk about a real quid pro quo." Behind her, the screen flickered to life. A video played. Joe Biden stood at a podium, a smug grin on his face. His voice rang through the chamber. "I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money." Well, son of a gun, he got fired. Gasps echoed through the room. Some senators exchanged stunned glances. The tension was suffocating. Bondi turned back to Schiff. "That was Joe Biden," she said coldly. bragging about withholding U.S. taxpayer money unless a Ukrainian prosecutor was fired. And who was that prosecutor investigating? She let the question hang before answering it herself. Burisma, the company paying Hunter Biden $83,000 a month. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Schiff's fingers twitched, but he remained silent. Bondi took another step forward. Mr. Schiff, did the House managers subpoena Joe Biden? Did they demand answers about his role in leveraging U.S. aid to protect his son's financial interests? Schiff didn't move. No, Bondi answered for him, because they knew what they would find. She lifted a document. They knew that Hunter Biden had no experience in energy, no experience in Ukraine, and no reason to sit on that board, except for one thing. His last name was Biden. She scanned the room, and yet, when President Trump dared to ask about it, he was accused of corruption? Schiff shifted in his chair, but Bondi didn't let up. She grabbed another document. And Burisma wasn't the only questionable deal, she continued. Let's talk about China. In 2017, Hunter Biden's firm received millions from a company linked to the Chinese Communist Party. Another murmur rippled through the chamber. And then there's Russia, Bondi added, voice steady. Hunter Biden's company received a $3.5 million wire transfer from Elena Baturina, a Russian oligarch. Schiff exhaled sharply. Bondi turned to him again. Tell me, Mr. Schiff, where was your outrage? Where were the subpoenas, the hearings, the media frenzy? Silence. She let it stretch for a moment before answering herself. There weren't any, because this was never about justice, it was never about corruption, it was about power. Schiff finally spoke, his voice tight. That's taken out of context. Bondi's lips curled into a knowing smile. Oh? Then tell me, Mr. Schiff. What context makes it acceptable for a sitting vice president to threaten a foreign government with U.S. aid unless they fire a prosecutor investigating his son's company? Schiff opened his mouth, but no words came out. Bondi turned back to the senators. This impeachment was never about uncovering the truth. It was about burying it. The House managers demanded that President Trump be removed from office for allegedly doing something that Joe Biden was caught admitting on camera. She gestured toward the screen, where Biden's face was still frozen mid-sentence. They told you Donald Trump was a threat to democracy, she continued, her voice unwavering. But let me ask you, what's more dangerous? Holding the powerful accountable, or pretending corruption doesn't exist when it benefits your side? Schiff remained silent. Bondi exhaled sharply. For years, the American people have been told what they can and can't question, what they should and shouldn't believe. But the truth is right here, in front of us. She glanced toward the cameras, and no amount of media spin can erase it. She turned back to Schiff, locking eyes with him. You want to talk about conflicts of interest? You want to talk about corruption? She gestured around the room. It's right in front of us. The chamber fell silent. Schiff refused to meet her gaze. But Bondi wasn't done yet, not even close. Pam Bondi turned her gaze toward the gallery, where rows of reporters sat with their notepads and laptops. Some were furiously typing, others avoided eye contact. They knew what was coming. For years, Bondi began, her voice calm but razor-sharp. The American people have been told what to believe. They've been told that questioning corruption is a conspiracy, that demanding accountability is dangerous. And who told them that? She let the question hang. The media. A ripple of tension spread through the room. The journalists in the back stiffened, some shifting in their seats. They weren't used to being the ones on trial. When this impeachment began, CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, and others spent weeks declaring that President Trump engaged in a quid pro quo, Bondi continued. They breathlessly claimed that he pressured Ukraine, that he must be removed from office. They demanded investigations, special hearings, wall-to-wall coverage. She paused, then turned to the screen behind her. But when this surfaced, when Joe Biden was caught on video admitting to doing the exact thing they accused President Trump of, What did the media do? Silence. They ignored it. Her voice was steel now. They didn't just ignore it, they covered it up. They dismissed it as a conspiracy. They told the American people it was taken out of context. They protected Joe Biden while they attacked President Trump. Schiff shifted slightly in his seat, but he still said nothing. Bondi's eyes swept across the chamber. "That is not journalism," she declared. "That is propaganda." The room grew even colder. She took another step forward. "We do not have a free press in this country anymore. What we have is a political machine disguised as journalism. A machine that works hand in hand with Washington's elites to control what the American people see, what they hear, and what they are allowed to believe." She turned to the reporters. "They told you the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation?" Her voice hardened. "That was a lie. They told you Joe Biden had no connection to Burisma?" She shook her head. "That was a lie. They told you Trump colluded with Russia?" She narrowed her eyes. "That was a lie." Each statement landed like a punch. "And yet," Bondi continued, her voice quiet now but no less powerful, "every time these lies were exposed, no one was held accountable." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Schiff clenched his jaw, his face darkening. Bondi turned back to him. "Tell me, Mr. Schiff, if democracy dies in darkness, why has your party spent so much effort keeping the truth buried?" Schiff exhaled sharply but remained silent. Bondi took another step forward, lowering her voice just slightly. "This impeachment was never about uncovering the truth. It was about controlling it." She scanned the room, her gaze locking onto one senator, then another. It was about making sure the American people only heard one side of the story. She let her words settle before delivering the final blow. "And it wasn't by accident, it wasn't incompetence, it was intentional." Bondi's tone softened, but her words were even sharper. "Because they knew," she said, "that if the American people started asking too many questions, they might start looking deeper, they might start seeing the pattern." She turned back to the screen. "They might realize that this isn't just about Joe Biden. It's about a system, a network of corruption, a network where politicians, the media, and big tech work together to keep the American people in the dark." She let that sit before driving her point home. The same media that smeared every Trump supporter as racist and deplorable for questioning Hunter Biden's business deals. She shook her head. They weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in control. Another long, suffocating pause. Schiff finally spoke, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. "You're attacking the press because they reported facts you don't like." Bondi laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Adam," she said, almost pityingly, "the problem isn't that they reported facts. The problem is that they decided which facts were worth reporting." Schiff had no response. Bondi turned back to the chamber. "This impeachment isn't about justice. It never was. It's about who gets to control the narrative, and for 4 years, the media has done everything in their power to control it for you." She took a final step forward and locked eyes with Schiff. "But today," her voice was ice, "you don't get to control it anymore." Schiff's paled slightly, but he still said nothing. Bondi straightened, her final words cutting through the tension like a blade. "For years, the American people have been gaslit, told that corruption wasn't corruption if it benefited the right people. But today, that illusion is gone." She stepped back, her expression unreadable. "The truth is out," she said, her voice low but deadly. "And no matter how hard you try, you can't bury it anymore." Pam Bondi stood firm, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, but her words were now meant for a far larger audience, the millions watching at home. The weight of everything she had revealed pressed down on the room, leaving Schiff, the senators, and the journalists in stunned silence. But this moment was not just about exposing corruption. It was about what came next. She turned to the cameras, her voice steady, unwavering. This fight was never just about Donald Trump. It was never just about impeachment. This has always been about control, who has it and who loses it. She paused, letting the tension settle before delivering the final, undeniable truth. For years they have told you what to believe, they have decided what is truth and what is conspiracy, they have called you names, censored your voices, and tried to make you feel powerless. But here's what they don't understand: you are not powerless. A murmur spread through the chamber. Some senators shifted uncomfortably. Schiff's lips pressed into a thin line, but he still said nothing. November 8th, Bondi continued, her voice filled with quiet force. That is the day when you take back the power. That is the day when the American people get to send a message that Washington belongs to them, not the elites. She leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the camera. They are terrified of what happens when the people refuse to be controlled, when you refuse to be silenced. She exhaled, then delivered the final call to action. If you believe in truth, if you believe in fighting for America, leave a comment below. Share this message. Make your voice heard, because this isn't just a story, it's a battle, and it's one we intend to win. With that, she stepped back, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The reckoning had begun.